The stagecoach came in early that morning, its wheels crunching over the frostbitten dirt of Dust Creek's main road. The sky hadn't yet shed the last of its stars, and the saloon lantern still flickered against the morning breeze. No one noticed the letter at first. No one except old Ben, the postmaster, who hobbled down the steps of his tiny office just as the driver tossed him the mailbag. It was thin, worn, addressed in a woman's hand, and sealed with wax that had cracked and faded. Ben squinted at it, his breath forming small clouds in the chill. When he read the return name, Isabel Dawson of Clay County, Missouri, his face drained. He looked up toward the town's chapel where a white banner already flapped. Today we join Clara McBride and Sheriff Eli Caro in matrimony. Ben didn't open the post office that morning. He locked the door, walked past the bakery, and disappeared behind the church. The letter stayed in his coat pocket, growing heavier by the second. By the time the sun rose over Dust Creek, the townsfolk had gathered in their best Sunday suits and prairie gowns, unaware of what was coming. Horses were tied in neat rows, children chased each other in the dust, and the McBride clan beamed as Clara stepped out in ivory lace, her golden hair pinned just so. It should have been the happiest day Dust Creek had seen in years, but fate doesn't always wait its turn. From the far end of the street came the pounding of small boots, Tobias McBride, Clara's youngest brother, clutching a crumpled envelope. "Pa says it's important," he cried, breathless. "It's got Eli's name." The music stopped. Clara turned on the chapel steps, her veil catching the light, and her smile faltered. Eli met the boy halfway and took the letter in silence. He recognized the handwriting instantly. Then, without a word, he walked up beside Clara, handed her the letter, and said, "You might want to read this before you say, 'I do.'" Gasps rippled through the crowd. The preacher stepped back, and with trembling fingers, Clara broke the seal. Clara McBride stood frozen on the chapel steps, the letter unfolding slowly in her white-gloved hands. The paper trembled as if it too felt the weight of the moment. The morning sun spilled across her face, but her eyes, once so bright, clouded like a storm coming over the plains. Her voice cracked as she began to read aloud, not to the crowd, but as if to herself, grasping for sense in what had just shattered. "To whom it may concern, if this reaches Dust Creek, and if Eli Caro is still there, let it be known he is already a married man. My name is Isabel Dawson, and I am his wife, left behind in Missouri with a child he never came back for. I write not in vengeance, but so the truth finds its way to the altar before lies are spoken under God." A woman screamed, another gasped, and somewhere behind the crowd, a man muttered, "God help her." Clara's knees buckled, and her father, Thomas McBride, rushed forward just in time to catch her before she fell. The letter drifted to the ground like a feather, landing between Clara's lace shoes and Eli's polished boots. Eli didn't move, didn't speak. Thomas turned, red rising in his cheeks like fire, and bellowed, "Is it true, Caro? Speak, damn you!" Eli's jaw tightened. "It's not what you think," he said, barely louder than the wind. "Then what is it?" Clara sobbed, her voice sharp, like a glass cracking under heat. "Did you think she wouldn't find you? Did you think I'd never know?" Eli looked at her, and something in his eyes broke. "I thought she was dead. There was a raid. After the war. I went back and found the house burned, no trace of her." But the explanation didn't settle. It stirred. Thomas stepped forward, hand to the holster on his hip. "You had no right to keep that from her, from us. Sheriff or not, you lied." The wedding was over. By nightfall, Clara's dress hung over the fence behind the chapel, soaked by rain that hadn't been forecast. Eli sat alone in his office, no badge on his chest, no fire in the stove. He stared at the letter, reading it over and over, as if hoping the words would change. And in a quiet cabin outside town, the old postmaster packed his bags. Something was coming. The town of Dust Creek didn't sleep that night. In the saloon, men whispered over half-empty bottles, voices low, eyes glancing toward the shuttered sheriff's office. At the general store, someone nailed a sign to the door, "McBride Loyal." The blacksmith, once Eli's closest ally, hammered horseshoes with more noise than purpose, his strikes fueled by anger or perhaps disappointment. The letter had been copied by someone, word for word, and passed from hand to hand like wildfire. Come morning, Clara was nowhere to be seen. Her father stood outside their homestead like a statue, one hand wrapped tightly around his Bible, the other gripping a cold cup of coffee. He hadn't spoken since the letter, not to Clara, not to anyone. Grief wore different faces, and Thomas McBride's looked like stone. Meanwhile, Eli Caro unlocked his door just after dawn and stepped into the street. The badge stayed tucked in a drawer, but his gun was holstered, heavy at his hip. He looked toward the church, then to the horizon. Then he walked straight to the McBride homestead. Clara met him halfway, barefoot, eyes red-rimmed, hair undone. "You should have told me," she said. "I wanted to," Eli replied. "Back in Missouri, I was conscripted, Clara. I didn't want to leave Isabel. I left thinking I'd be back in a week. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left. I couldn't find a grave, just ashes." She searched his face, tears balancing in the corners of her eyes. "Then why not tell me later?" "Because I was afraid you'd see me as a coward." Clara swallowed hard. "And now?" Eli nodded slowly. "Now I reckon you do." She stepped back. "I don't know what I see anymore." Behind her, the door creaked open. Thomas McBride stood in the frame, face shadowed, voice low. "Go on, boy. You ain't sheriff here no more. And if you don't ride out by sundown, I'll make sure you don't ride at all." Eli didn't flinch. "If I go, I won't come back." Thomas leaned forward. "Good." But Clara didn't watch Eli leave. She turned, walked inside, and closed the door behind her. Not with hate, not with forgiveness, just with the silence of someone whose world had stopped making sense. And 2 days later, the town got a second letter. This one wasn't from Missouri. It was carried by a woman with a child. The noon sun scorched Dust Creek when the second letter arrived, though this time it wasn't delivered by post. She came riding in slow, dust trailing behind her, a small child tucked against her hip and a rifle slung across her saddle like a shadow she refused to shake. Her hat was low, but her eyes searched the town like a map she'd memorized too long ago. Folks stopped in their tracks as she passed. The blacksmith wiped his hands on his apron. The saloon doors stilled mid-swing, and even the dogs hushed. No one spoke her name. They didn't have to. Isabel Dawson had come to Dust Creek herself. She tied her horse outside the boarding house and asked only one question: "Where can I find Eli Caro?" Old Ben, watching from behind the mercantile window, dropped his cigar. Clara, who had ventured into town for the first time in days, froze just steps away. Their eyes met, Isabel's and Clara's, and for a moment the wind carried nothing but stillness between them. "I'm not here to fight," Isabel said, her voice soft but clear. Clara nodded slowly, her throat tightening. "Then why come?" "I needed him to see what he left behind." Isabel's daughter peeked out from behind her mother's coat, bright blue eyes just like Eli's. Eli was in the livery when word reached him. He walked out slowly, brushing hay from his shirt, and saw them from across the street. The rifle didn't scare him. The silence did. He crossed toward Isabel like a man walking through water, every step heavier than the last. "I thought you were dead," he said, voice hollow. "Maybe part of me was. I went back. The house was gone. No trace of you." You didn't try hard enough." Behind her words was pain, not rage, not vengeance, just the raw ache of a wound long left to fester. The child clung to her skirt. Eli's hands trembled. "What's her name?" Isabel looked down. "Hope." The town, once abuzz with rumors and sides, watched now in silence as the past came riding in with flesh and bone. Clara stepped forward and stood beside Isabel. "You don't owe me an apology," Clara whispered. "She does." And for the first time in Dust Creek history, the saloon stayed closed that night, not from lack of drink, but because no one wanted to miss what would come next. Dust Creek no longer felt like Dust Creek. The town divided itself in whispers and wary glances. Some doors bore new signs: McBride loyal, Sheriff betrayer, Isabel deserves justice, as if branding a side would protect them from the truth they'd all witnessed unfold in the street. Other homes chose silence, drawing curtains closed like eyelids over a wounded face. Eli stayed in the sheriff's office, though he hadn't worn the badge since the wedding fell apart. He kept to himself, feeding his horse, repairing the roof by hand, and avoiding questions. The rifle that once sat behind his desk now leaned by the front door, loaded. Clara hadn't spoken to him since Isabel's arrival, though they passed each other once outside the church. She'd nodded, but her eyes no longer lingered. What remained between them wasn't anger, it was absence, a space where love once sat warm and full, but now felt like wind through an empty barn. At the general store, Clara's best friend Sadie helped her fold linen and stock shelves. Sadie was quick with a joke and quicker with silence when anything touched Eli's name, until she broke it. "You remember that spring," she said, not looking up, "when Eli stopped sending for supplies from Kansas City?" Clara frowned. "Yeah, he said freight costs were too high." Sadie hesitated. "I saw him at the telegraph office. He was writing someone. Every Tuesday. Never mailed from here. Always gave it to Ben." Clara's hands froze on the fabric. "You're saying he was in touch with Isabel?" "I don't know," Sadie said, but her voice shrunk. "I never read anything, I just saw." Clara didn't answer. She walked out of the store into the open sunlight, heart spinning between betrayal and disbelief. Had Eli lied again? Or was someone else pulling threads from behind the curtain? That night, the sound of breaking glass shattered the quiet. Eli's window had been smashed. Someone had scrawled LIAR in ash across his door. And up in the hills, just beyond the edge of Dust Creek, a lone figure lit a fire and watched the town glow. Just after sundown, a stranger rode in from the South Pass. He wasn't fast, but steady, like someone who had nothing to fear and nowhere left to run. His coat was worn buffalo hide, sun-faded and crusted with dust from days on the trail. He led a pack mule behind him, and from its side hung a crate marked with an emblem no one in Dust Creek recognized. But what caught the eye more than the mule or his rifle was his face. Some swore he looked like someone they'd seen years ago, maybe back east. Others thought he resembled a Dawson, Isabel's kin, perhaps, but no one knew for sure. The stranger dismounted without a word, nodded once to a boy fetching water, and tied his horse outside the boarding house. By morning, news of the stranger had curled around every post and porch swing. He checked into a room, paid in silver coins, and left a note for Isabel with the clerk. It read, "You and I have unfinished business. Don't pretend otherwise." Isabel read it by lamplight, her jaw stiffening as her daughter napped beside her. She folded the note without a word, slid a small derringer into her sleeve, and went straight to the livery. That's where she found Clara. "Didn't expect to see you," Isabel said. Clara turned. "I was just feeding the strays." The two women regarded one another in the still air, two ghosts of the same storm. For a moment, it seemed like maybe, just maybe, They shared something no one else in Dust Creek could understand. "I didn't come to take him back," Isabel said. "I didn't ask," Clara replied, "but you did come to finish something." Isabel's eyes flicked toward the hills. There are men who don't forgive being left behind. Later that night, a fire tore through the sheriff's office. It started in the roof. Some say it was lightning. Others swear they saw a figure on horseback ride off just before the blaze caught. Eli barely escaped. He kicked down the back door, choking on smoke, shirt torn, face blackened. And it was Isabel who ran into the flames to save her daughter, Hope, after the child had wandered in, looking for Eli. She came out with the girl coughing in her arms, skirt smoldering, hands blistered. People saw that. And for the first time since she'd arrived, the town saw more than a letter. They saw a mother. The fire burned long into the night, drawing half the town into the square with buckets and blankets. But by the time the last flame died, the sheriff's office was a skeleton of its former self. Timbers collapsed, desk scorched, iron bars twisted from heat. And still, Eli stood inside the rubble, a child clinging to his arm. Hope. She wouldn't let go. He held her like he had something to atone for. Not to Isabel, not to Clara, but to the little girl whose wide eyes hadn't blinked through smoke and ash. Clara watched from across the street, her hand clutching her shawl so tightly her knuckles paled. Thomas McBride stood beside her, unmoved, his jaw locked, his voice quiet but cold. Look at him. Town burns and he's still pretending he's a savior. Clara didn't answer. You think one good act erases the rest? That's how snakes survive, by shedding their skin when they get caught. Clara turned slowly. He saved a child. Thomas narrowed his eyes. He burned this town long before the fire. But not everyone agreed anymore. By morning, the undertone in Dust Creek had shifted. Women brought Isabel jars of honey and aloe for her hands. Young boys left bread on the windowsill for Hope. And at the saloon, men who once vowed allegiance to the McBrides now sat quiet, unsure of which side honor truly stood on. Sadie, meanwhile, watched everything with unease. She'd spent days listening, watching, keeping close to Clara, but her fingers twitched more than usual, and her eyes darted too quick when someone mentioned the fire. Then one night, Clara caught her in the telegraph office, alone, burning a page in the small stove behind the desk. "What are you doing?" Clara asked, heart thudding. Sadie jumped. "It's nothing, just receipts." But Clara saw the seal before the page curled into flame. It was Isabel's. That same night, someone rode through Dust Creek with no lantern, no saddlebag, no name. They stopped just long enough to nail a sign to the church door, "Truth doesn't burn." And when Clara opened her shutters the next morning, she found a scrap of the burned page tucked beneath the sill. It wasn't from Isabel. It was from someone closer, someone she never thought would lie. Clara held the scorched page in her lap, staring at what hadn't yet turned to ash. The ink had bled, but enough remained. "You said once the wedding falls apart, he'll be unseated. The land will revert. The McBrides will be humiliated. Signed, S. Her breath caught. Her chest tightened. Only one person signed their name like that. Sadie. She rode straight to Sadie's cabin just past the ridge. No coat, no pause. The sky above boiled with cloud, but the storm hadn't broken yet. When she reached the porch, she didn't knock. She walked straight in. Sadie was sitting by the fire, calm as the prairie after gunfire. "You forged the letter," Clara said. Sadie didn't look surprised. "I copied what I had to." "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Why destroy everything?" Sadie stood, eyes flickering with something twisted between shame and pride. "My brother died under Eli. The war took him, but Eli gave the order that killed him, and then he came here, building a future while mine was buried. That wasn't my fault. But your name, McBride, your wedding gave Eli everything: respect, power, land. You think ruining me brought your brother back?" Sadie's hands clenched. "I didn't want to ruin you, just stop him. I never thought Isabel would really come." Clara stepped back, trembling. "You lit the fire too, didn't you?" Sadie didn't answer. The silence said enough. By dusk, Sadie was brought into town, quiet, wrists bound, tears dried before they ever touched her cheeks. The sheriff's office was gone, but justice hadn't left Dust Creek. Eli stood in the church this time, not with a pistol, but with words. He faced the town and said what few men could say in public without flinching. "I failed Isabel. I failed Clara. But what was done to me was done through lies, and lies don't fix the dead." Thomas McBride rose from his pew. "You're no lawman anymore." "No," Eli said, "but I am a father now, whether she forgives me or not." He looked toward Isabel, who held hope in her lap, silent. He looked toward Clara, whose eyes met his and didn't turn away. Outside, the first raindrop of the storm finally fell. The sky cracked, and from the back of the church someone shouted, "McBride's riding for the jail." Gunshots echoed before the doors even closed. Dust Creek had heard gunshots before, but these rang different, louder, sharper, like they split not just air but something sacred. The townsfolk surged from the chapel, boots thudding against wet earth, voices rising into the growing storm. At the jail, still standing though scarred by fire, Thomas McBride stood with a shotgun raised, its barrel smoking. The deputy lay groaning beside the door, grazed in the arm, too shocked to speak. Inside, Sadie screamed, "Thomas, stop!" Clara's voice pierced through the wind as she ran toward him, rain soaking her dress, hair tangled like tumbleweed. He didn't lower the gun. "She lied. She brought shame on this family," Thomas growled. "She tried to destroy you." Clara stepped between him and the door. "And you think this makes it right?" He didn't answer. "You taught me justice meant truth," Clara said, her hands trembling but steady in the air. "Not vengeance, not silencing people when we're too hurt to feel the truth of them. She took your wedding day, your dignity. She gave me the truth Eli never did. That's more than you ever gave me." Thomas faltered. Behind them, Eli arrived on horseback, face cut, boots slipping in the mud as he dismounted. He approached slowly, eyes on Thomas, one hand on his holster. But Clara shook her head at both men. No more guns. No more men telling women what to forgive. Isabel stepped through the crowd then, her child wrapped tight to her chest, her face unreadable. "Let her speak," Isabel said. Sadie, still inside the cell, wept silently now. "I only wanted someone to hurt the way I did." Eli's voice was soft. "We all hurt, Sadie. The ones who survive are the ones who learn from it." Clara turned to Thomas. "Put the gun down. If you ever loved me, not as your daughter, but as a woman trying to live on her own 2 feet, you'll let go." For a moment, nothing moved. The rain fell. The town held its breath. And then Thomas McBride lowered the shotgun and wept. Later that evening, Clara walked Eli to the edge of town. He kissed her hand, but she didn't kiss him back. Not yet. "I still love you," he said. "I know," she whispered. Then she turned and walked away. 3 weeks later, Dust Creek looked almost peaceful. Smoke no longer rose from its rooftops, but from fresh-baked loaves behind the general store. The church bell, which hadn't rung since Clara's wedding day, unraveled, now chimed each morning, not for ceremony but for rebuilding. A new sheriff's office stood framed in timber, half-finished but standing tall. Eli Caro helped hammer the beams. No badge, just calloused hands trying to shape something honest out of ruin. He still lived above the livery, spending his nights reading to Hope when Isabel let him visit. She hadn't left town, surprisingly. Instead, she took a job teaching letters and sums in the schoolhouse. Folks had begun to greet her by name, not whisper. As for Sadie, she remained in custody, but not in chains. Her father, the blacksmith, visited her every day. Her cell was swept clean, her meals warm. She had written a real letter now, her own hand, her own apology, addressed to Clara. No one knew if Clara had read it, because Clara was gone. She'd boarded the eastbound train just before sunrise, wearing a pale blue coat and holding nothing but a small case, and another letter, a fresh one. She hadn't told anyone where she was headed, just that it was time to see more of the world than Dust Creek allowed. Before leaving, she had stood once more in front of the church, not crying, not bitter, just still, watching the place where love had broken, where lies had burned, and where truth had risen, not in triumph, but in quiet survival. Thomas McBride had stood a few paces behind her, hat in hand, unsure of whether to speak. She turned once, nodded to him with a tenderness that was neither forgiveness nor farewell, but something gentler. Then she stepped aboard. As the train began to pull away, the letter in her lap remained unopened. Its seal was marked with an E. She didn't open it, not yet. But she smiled. Sometimes forgiveness isn't a moment, it's a direction. And Dust Creek would never be the same again.